Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene, and it's been a while, but this is your March to-do list for your garden. And it's also the conservatory corner. I am going to add a segment where I talk about what is going on at my work. So it's been a while. I've been taking some time off, rehabbing an ankle, starting the nonprofit cat rescue, but the garden never waits. The seasons keep changing, and it definitely feels like spring today. It was a nice 74 degrees, a little too warm, but we are getting more rain, so that is good because it's always scary when temperatures warm up and it gets a little dry too soon. So we've had a decent amount of rain. I would say I think we're on average, which is good because last year I think it was average as well, so that's nice to have 2 years of consistent rain. Of course, the weeds are loving it a lot. This time of year, it's always hard to get a handle on the weeds because it's too wet to mow them and do anything, but I'll bring that up here on our to-do list. So I'm just going to get started. So of course, if you've been to the nursery, you've seen tomato plants, and many people fall for them with this sort of false spring of, oh my goodness, it's warm. But remember, it's still too early to plant. It's only beginning of March. I would say the earliest would be beginning of April, mid-April. Would be when you'd want to plant them. But it is now the time to plant seeds inside to get started. So if you like to grow your own seeds, say you can't find a specific variety, or you just like to grow them because you're that type of person, then you want to start them inside. So say you have your tomato seeds and your pepper seeds and your eggplant. Yes, you could start those now. Now, I started my flower seeds this past weekend, my annual flowers. And what I do is someone mentioned they came by my house and they're like, oh, you must have a greenhouse hidden in here. And I'm like, nope. And actually isn't high on my list to have a greenhouse in the Central Valley when it gets 113 during the summer and it gets down to, high 20s in the winter. It really is limited on what you could do unless you have a really fancy setup, i.e. heaters and a really nice cooling system. The only thing I would use it for is starting my seeds. And luckily enough, I have a small cottage that when it's not housing rescue cats, I could at least take one room and start seeds in there. So I just have a wire rack shelf unit. I have these lights. They're the Barina lights. I bought them on Amazon. They're the 5,000 full spectrum watts. They're the ones that you could sort of daisy chain together. You could just hang them with zip ties. You could put them really close to the plants and it won't burn. In fact, they need to be close to the plants for the light, but they're a little addictive because you can daisy chain them. So you just need one outlet. And I think they sell them in packs of 10, but they're phenomenal for starting seeds. I do bottom heat. You could buy individual heat mats that fit underneath one standard nursery tray, or ones that are like 3 feet long that go across the whole span of like the rack system I have. And I just start, there's different cell sizes I start. If I have a larger plant like a sunflower and I'm going to plant directly from a cell pack, I'll do the bigger cell packs. Seed starting mix is a must, but you can make your own. You can just buy peat moss and add some perlite. I must say I'm cheating a bit. I'm doing straight peat moss, which it would be nice to have a little perlite in there to lighten it up, but I'm just checking my water and making sure it's not staying too wet. So I do bottom heat to get those seeds going, and then you want to turn the lights on once they start germinating, unless, of course, they need light to germinate. So they don't get really leggy. And I'm going to try to keep them inside as limited as possible. So you want to time it right where as soon as they get a little big and they're just like, oh, I need more light, you move them out for 2 weeks to harden them off, and then they go in the ground. So right now you could do most of your annual flowers like your sunflowers, your strawflowers, your zinnias, your daucus, anything like that. And of course your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants be the same. Now eggplants and peppers are going to go in the ground a little bit later. Some of them can take a while to germinate, and they are slower growing than tomatoes. So if you start them now, just keep in mind you don't necessarily want to plant them in the ground the same time as tomatoes. And so you may want to keep them outside to harden them off, or even inside. So just keep that in mind. But that is my standard way of starting seeds inside. It doesn't have to be fancy. Um, and now I have had the cats where cats have said, that's a warm heat mat. I'm going to move these plants. And then you find your cat laying on the heat mat because it's literally like the heat mats they sell for cats without the padding. So start your seeds inside. You can direct some of your seeds right now in the ground. Your flowers, you can grow directly in the ground, like sunflowers. You don't need to plant them in seed packs or seeds cell trays. You can put them in the ground. And of course, you can do anything directly into the ground as long as the soil is warming up. It's a little too cold to direct sow some of them. And it is that time where we're transitioning out of winter and going into summer, but you can do a second round of winter crops. Now, you could still plant broccoli, the plants. You don't want to do seeds because it's going to be too long from seed to growth. So broccoli plants, cauliflower plants, you could still do leeks, lettuce, radishes, direct sow in the ground, peas direct sow, carrots direct sow, and beets direct sow. Those are really fast growing winter annuals. So they'll just sort of come up, and then before the heat comes, you'll be able to harvest them. So, and then of course, let's not forget potatoes. March is a great time to start your potatoes, seed potatoes in the ground. And so I know this past weekend I ripped out some of my winter crops that were done. So usually when I go harvest cauliflower, I go out there and I just cut the cauliflower and I leave all the foliage and everything to sort of wither down. And what I did this weekend is I just cut all the leaves off, laid them on the soil, let them compost in it. Now, the ones I did remove, my Brussels sprouts, which I thought I was going to have a really good crop this year. And same thing always happens. It's like, am I? And then they never quite get as plump as I want. And I leave them. And then the cabbage aphids come. And the cabbage aphids are really the only winter pest that I have besides the cabbage loopers early on, which really a little BT takes care of. But the cabbage aphids could do a number. And broccoli, even though I harvested most of it, had some cabbage aphids. So I just put those out and those go in the compost bin. But everything else I'm just removing and chopping up into pieces and laying in the soil. I'm not ready to plant yet. And I figure that stuff's going to decompose and just add a little organic matter. So anytime you think there's a problematic pest or disease, you don't want to put it back in the soil. But for the most part, I'm not going to take that out, put it in the compost bin. I'm just going to leave it in the soil. And that's what I like to do there. So seed starting, cleaning up your vegetable garden, of course, adding compost right now. And if you're in raised beds, you might notice that the soil level is down. My raised beds, the soil level is down. So instead of just adding compost, I'm going to have to refill with some soil, some of the more like a potting soil instead of just compost to just raise that soil volume up. I don't want to just add everything as compost because it's not going to hold the water enough. So adding compost to get the nutrients back in, but adding more soil to get that soil volume up. So it's actually what the plants are growing in. Let's see what else. Bulb planting. So yes, your daffodils are probably blooming, spring bulbs, tulips, hyacinths are blooming, but March is actually time to plant your summer blooming bulbs like dahlias and gladiolas. So yeah, it's sort of fun to have a two-tiered bloom season here. Now, can you prune your fruit trees? They are blooming right now, and you might think, oh, well, it's flowering, so I can't prune them. That's not true. You can prune them. In fact, the mini orchard at work, I really need to prune because we haven't pruned in years, and it's blooming right now. Just keep in mind that you never want to prune when there's rainy season the rain called for like 3 days after because the wounds are open. So maybe you haven't had time to prune because it hasn't been dry enough. So now would be a good time once the weather starts drying out. You're going to lose some fruit for sure. You see all those blossoms and you're like, well, I'm pruning those off. Those are all potential fruit. But also remember, if every single flower set fruit, you're going to want to thin it or the plant will thin it itself. So yes, you could prune now and without a problem. Can you spray now? No, you can't spray your peaches and nectarines for peach leaf curl if they're blooming right now. So you've missed that boat. But next year, just remember next year, you do want to paint your fruit trees right now, especially if they're young and the older limbs are not shading the trunk. You want to paint it for sunburn. That is personally, in my opinion, besides like a weed eater hitting the trunk, the number one way that it wounds the tree and allows pathogens and bacteria and fungus to enter. So remember, you're going to want to take white interior latex paint, dilute it 50%, and paint it all around the tree trunk, especially emphasizing the south and west side where the sun is most intense. Do that for very young fruit trees. Do that if you've pruned your fruit trees hard and the trunk is exposed. Really get on that, because even a day like today, it was pretty intense. The sun was pretty intense. Can you prune your citrus now? Yes, you can. Remember, you always want to prune after the last chance of frost. But for us is March 1st. Remember, you don't want to just go crazy and prune your citrus. Remember, don't prune more than 30%. Citrus really don't need to be pruned, but if it's really crowded in the center, you do want to start opening it up, allow for that airflow. You always want to remove any root suckers. That's throughout the time of year. Any water sprouts, those are those tall, crazy growth on your plant. Remove those any time of year you can. And just sort of do a light pruning of it. Fertilizing, if you do fertilize, spring is a good time. And I say if you fertilize. Now, I always say, I don't fertilize, add compost. But some people will say that's a form of fertilizer. Okay, so I'm adding nutrients, manure form of fertilizing. But if you like to go by a 10-10-10, 20-20-20, spring is a good time, especially if you have pots. If you have potted plants, you're going to need to fertilize, of course, because there's no way they replenish their own nutrients by being in a contained environment. Speaking of pots, if you have succulents in containers, you've had them hidden away in the rain. Rain season's still not over, but they're starting to be active growing, so they can handle the rain a little bit more. Spring and during active growth is when you want to transplant your succulents. You don't want to do it in the fall or in winter, but remember, when you transplant your succulents, don't water them in right away. It's the opposite of leafy plants. You want them to maybe sit and heal for minimum 3 days, up to, like if you have a large cacti, up to like 10 days or 2 weeks even. Check your irrigation, especially if you have drip irrigation. Don't assume it's going to work. Don't assume your timers are going to work. So test it. There's nothing worse than just assuming things are going to be watered and you get a really hot day and you're gone. Or your sprinklers are going off like at 5 a.m. and they're not getting watered anywhere. They're just shooting up in the air and you're wasting a whole bunch of water. So just turn them on, go inspect them, see if you have any leaks. Drip lines are notorious for getting tears and ripping from animals, from just people tripping over them, from weed eaters hitting them. Pest monitoring. It's going to be that time of year where we're going to get aphids, which is fine. You just see the aphids and you start monitoring for the beneficial insects. If you had problems before, you might want to get some beneficial nematodes with certain pests, or if you have the leaf-footed bugs on your pomegranates. Usually they come much later in the season, but if you have sort of the stink bug problems, just be aware that you want to start tackling the adults and pulling off the adults. If you have white fly problems, early on is the time to get it. You want to check the underleaves of the problematic plants and look for those flat white discs. Those are the eggs. If you could start knocking those off with a hose or soap spray before you're going to curb some of the issues. You could put out the yellow sticky traps early on and try to get them. So just start monitoring and be aware of looking for, because early on, some of these pests, if you could get a grip on them sooner, then they won't be as problematic. So let's see here too. It is a little late for bare root planting, but I'm not going to say no. And a lot of nurseries, what they do is they take their bare root and they pot them up. So they're now in soil and now little roots are forming. So you could still plant roses. You could still plant fruit trees. They may not be, quote, fully bare root, but you could still plant them. And I would go ahead and plant bare root too. If a nursery had them, I would plant them. So you could still plant. In fact, right now is the time to pretty much plant anything. We're coming out of frost season, so anything that's frost sensitive, you could plant, like citrus and certain salvias, natives, perennials. Really, it's a great time. It's cool enough, going to get some rain, so the roots are going to get established before the heat comes. So lots and lots to do besides just cleaning up. And speaking of the weeds, I know the winter weeds like the oxalis are still peak right now. Remember, there's no magic prevention for one particular weed. It's all the same. If you have a weed right now that's a problem and you see it flowering, cut the flowers off. If all you could do is go out there and chop the flower heads off and not remove the plant, you're ahead of the curve, because the more flowers, the more fruit set, the more problematic that weed's going to be in the future. So sometimes when I'm walking at work and I see a big giant weed and the only thing I could do is knock the flower head off, that's what I'll do. I just prevented that from going to seed, and then I could go back and get rid of that one weed that's just that problem right now. So, my go-to is the weed eater, the mower, wood chip, smothering with cardboard, because pretty soon the summer weeds are going to come up. My favorite, which is gone for the winter, is bindweed, but it's going to be back, and that's a problem. So lots to do, lots of monitoring, and of course the fun part is plant shopping. Get to go shopping for plants, get to order seeds from the seed company, and so that's about it. I think I covered everything. I'm sure not everything. I'm sure everyone has their own things that they need to do in their garden or like to do. I am now going to move on to Conservatory Corner. I decided to add this because, my work is such an integral part of my plant life, and we have a lot going on, and I want to talk about that. So, of course, Conservatory Corner, that means UC Davis Botanical Conservatory, where I work, where we have over close to 4,000 different species of plants. We just did a plant count. We have about 280 plant families of the world's close to 600 plant families. So almost half of the world's plant families we have at least one representative of, which is pretty cool. Right now, what we're prepping for is a plant sale that we're having that we haven't had in several years. We're going to have it on April 19th. It's in person only. We're not fancy enough to do online sales, but we're trying to get fancy and do credit cards. We can't do Venmo. We can't do PayPal. Cash. And when I mention checks to kids, they're like, huh, what's that? And then credit cards. So we're hoping to have a lot of 4-inch, 3-inch plants. Most of our plants are tropicals, so they're house plants. We're going to have some carnivorous plants. And the big news is, for the first time, we're going to sell welwitchias. Welwitchias are a succulent, I would say desert plant. It's not a true succulent. It's called succulent, but needs more water than most. And it's quite unusual. In fact, I think in April, I am going to record a podcast all about welwitchia. And so I'll talk more about it. But these are very in-demand plants. It'll be our most high-end plant, $50 for a little seedling. And speaking of welwitchias, we do make mistakes. I do make mistakes at work. And this plant, even though it's a desert plant, is very susceptible to light changes. And in November, we're taking the whitewash off of the conservatory, which we do in winter. It's an old greenhouse. We have to apply whitewash as shading. And there's hardly any on, just like a little film. And I went, okay. And the next thing I know, the leaves are just crisp and the plants are just crisp. And these are plants that are probably about 5 years old. And I freaked out, and it just goes to show you that everyone makes mistakes. I still make mistakes. So the plants are coming out of it, but that was one big mistake this past season of it. Other things going on, we got a new plant to the collection to bloom. It's always fun when plant nerds get to see a plant bloom that they haven't ever seen bloom for them. I've seen this plant in bloom at the Conservatory of Flowers, and I actually saw it in Costa Rica, and I'm like, I want that plant. And Conservatory of Flowers, San Francisco Conservatory of Flowers, was nice enough to give us a plant. And it's called Cavendishia grandifolia. It's a member of the blueberry family. And yes, the fruits are edible, but almost every blueberry family fruit I've had, except for blueberries, just tastes like bland blueberries. And this just has very unusual flowers. I posted on my Instagram. It has pink fused petals and a white calyx. They almost look like little lipstick tubes. And it's a climbing, trailing plant. And it's pretty young, and it got it to bloom. So that was really exciting. And of course, Victoria Amazonica is still going strong. This is the second largest water lily in the world. This is a student decided he wanted to grow it. I said, okay, if you could find the seeds. He found the seeds. I'm like, okay, if you could get it to germinate. He got it to germinate, all of them. And I bought him a little tub. Things started growing. Next thing I know, I'm buying swimming pools, above ground swimming pools for this thing, and then water heaters and lights and water filters. And yeah, so I'm supposed to bow by Victoria when I go by her. And the joke is sometimes I just flip her off. So she's amazing. And in the wild, their leaves could get up to 9 feet across. Ours is only, I think our largest was like 3 feet, 4 feet. And a lot of the botanical gardens were doing a way off, and we did it after they all did theirs. But we put weights on one of our leaves, and it held up to, I think, 38 pounds. So the leaves are really leathery feeling, and they have tons of spines on the underneath. And we think the spines are really for predation. And also it sort of smothers anything trying to grow in its way. And it seems like it smothers its own leaves even as new ones emerge. It sort of just drowns them. The most exciting thing for me is that the petioles are supposed to taste like bacon, but I haven't tried that yet. But it was amazing. Our student got seed, germinated the seed, got it to flower, got it to seed, collected the seed, and has germinated more. So all within 1 year, which for the first time trying to do it and for the small setup we have, is pretty darn amazing. The flowers are really pretty. They are fairly large. They're about 3-4 inches across, and they smell like pineapple when they open up. And they're female first, like most plants that are going to be like perfect. They're either have a time or spatial separation between male and female. So they're female first, shut down, and the following night they're male. So of course they don't pollinate themselves. And they start open pure white, and then they fade to pink. So quite beautiful. We had flowers and we got fruit, and then there's all these buds on them. And then sort of the day length changed and shortened. And we had all these buds just sitting there ready to go for months and months and months and months. So I'm hoping with the increased day lengths, the ones that have survived, the flowers will open up. They're quite pretty. So we have the world's smallest water lily in the collection and the world's second largest water lily in the collection. So that's pretty fun to have. But he's begging me for another swimming pool, and there's absolutely no space, and we're not going to get another swimming pool. This quarter, I have 12 interns. I try to have at least one internship a year. I know I could easily do 2 and fill it up, but it's more time. But I am having them propagate and transplant for the plant sale. So I think we're going to have close to 60 different species for our plant sale. So we're going to have different begonias, different aeroids, some succulents, some carnivorous plants. We're dividing our sarracenias, which are our American pitcher plants. So we're going to divide those. We're propagating pinguiculas, which are the butterworts. I don't think they'll be ready in time, though. But we'll have another plant sale in the fall at least. So we'll gear up for that. So if you're local, come on out. It's on a Saturday. Wanted it on a Saturday so people who work normally would have it during the week. But that's not fair for the people who work during the week and can't make it onto campus. So next week at work, what I get to do is spray whitewash on. We are getting a new website, which is quite exciting. But of course, then now we're having to write articles and want all this plant information up there besides just our hours and all the boring stuff. So we're all taking turns writing articles. We're going to have a section called notable plants. So we're going to have longer format articles about the Amorphophallus, the Welwitschia, the Victoria, the chocolate, vanilla, everything we're sort of known for. And people come in and go, wow, you have that. And then of course we'll have, little blurbs about our other I'm not going to say not so notable plants, but just all of our other plants that are equally as wonderful. But that is about it. So remember, if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and email me at marlenetheplantlady@gmail.com. You could find me on Instagram and Facebook, Marlene the Plant Lady. And until next time, everyone, happy gardening.